Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend Collar. What if with another fiction? What if Deku battle against Humarise? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Upon the ceiling was the depiction of a beastly chimera, with its body being an amalgamation of different animals. It was in the large room that appeared to be a foyer, with bookshelves on the walls and several hooded people with metal masks standing around in an organized fashion. They all had symbols on their cloaks of a six-leafed clover, standing amongst each other with their left hands over their stomachs in solidarity. Up at the top of the two staircases that flanked to a second level, 5 figures stood and looked out at the sea of soldiers. One was a slim yet well-toned young man with amber eyes, dark eyeliners, studded ears, and spiky green hair with a crew cut. He had a set of distinct, dark-colored tattoos covering half of his upper body. He was shirtless in a pair of dark-colored pants with a belt, along with a metal chain with a cyclopean skull-shaped pendant around his neck. He had several intricate rings on his fingers and a metal armband on his right wrist. Over that was a leather jacket with a fur collar. There was also a handsome young man with light silver hair and hazel eyes. He was wearing a dark green V-neck shirt with a high-collared black leather jacket over it. He also bore burgundy jeans with a silver chain drooping down over them, black leather chaps with 3 bands encircling his right calf, and black shoes with black buckles. Next, there was a tall man with black, messy hair. His most notable feature was a black, cross-shaped mark on the left side of his forehead, as it extended down across his left eye. He wore a black shirt with a high collar and black pants that tuck into brown boots. Additionally, he bore a dark blue fur coat with a short, light gray fur mantle on top. The back of the mantle was emblazoned with a spade symbol. Then there was a young woman with a thin, curvy figure and long, pale blonde hair that was tied into a bun, with some bangs falling to the side of her face. Most notably, she donned a golden, crown-like visor around her face, obscuring all her facial features excluding her mouth. She had a tattoo on her left shoulder that resembled a reset button inside of a sun. She wore a baggy white onesie that was wrapped around her neck and exposed the top of her arms and shoulders and the sides of her breasts. She also wore a darkly colored fabric under the white outer layer. She bore white sandal-like shoes that covered the majority of her feet, except her toes and heels. Just below her chest was a red sun-like figure upon the white robe. Lastly, there was a woman whose skin was a deathly pallor. She had jet black sclere in her eyes and glowing crimson irises. Her hair was styled into a large bun with 6 offshoots wrapped together that also suspended several obsidian-colored ornaments. Dark purple veins lined her face and arms, and she had a red, diamond-shaped marking in the center of her forehead. She wore a long-sleeved, black partially exposed cold shoulder robe, ending in middle finger loops, with red trim flowing from her raised collar, bordering through the vertical window, exposing her bust, to the sides of her hips, and 3 crimson stripes, flowing all the way down to the bottom hem of her robe. Additionally, she had ornate, gunmetal-colored bone-like arm cuffs upon her upper arms, and an elaborate, cross-shaped brooch with a rhombus-shaped ruby gemstone atop her clavicle, closing her outfit and forming the aforementioned slightly wider, diamond-shaped window. Completing her ensemble was a similar black cape with matching red trim, with a couple additional red gemstones hanging from her bun. HMPH, Poseidon Shura huffed. Do we really need these rejects to help with the damn plan? He wondered as his arms were folded over his chest. I could just zap 'em all to death in an instant, Hamia giggled. So childish, Vali Lucifer muttered out, while Zenon Zagrates said nothing. All of you be quiet, Salem requested. It's almost time for things to begin, she informed. Footsteps approached. The Master of Grimm stepped aside for a tall and slim man with luminescent light blue skin, a shaved head of dark blue hair, and a goatee mustache and arrow-shaped earrings. He wore a long white cloak with dark red parts inside. The reflective floor beneath his feet revealed that there were discs floating upon his clothes, containing some type of luminescent energy. The masked figures below all stood to attention as he stepped forward, standing at the railing. Why were superhuman powers, he began. The meta-abilities so casually known as quirks, forced upon our kind, he inquired aloud. Some of the men below drew spears onto the statue of baby in a bed of flowers. Why was the first metahuman, the shining baby, born onto us? Their leader asked on. These quirks bring about nothing but tragedy, he proclaimed. They are not a blessing on our world, but the beginning of its end, he declared, holding up a book in his hands for all to see. It is foretold in the quirk doomsday theory, he stated. As generations pass, powers mix and evolve, he pointed out, looking up at the chimera painting upon the ceiling. Eventually, none will be able to control their abilities, he grimly added. In this hour of need, 80% of humanity is sick with quirks, he noted. How many of the remaining pure humans will have relations with quirk holders? He wondered aloud rhetorically, spawning even more who are cursed with this blight. He snarled out with disgust in his tone. Our extinction is nigh at hand, he said. We, humarise, must take action, he declared firmly, even if it means dyeing the earth red with blood. He added, taking the quirk doomsday theory book and holding it up against his chest. That will simply be our righteous burden to bear, he decided as he shut his eyes solemnly for a moment. His multiversal colleagues all looked over to him, with Salem letting off a small grin. For humanity's salvation, he declared firmly. For humanity's salvation, for humanity's salvation. His followers below chanted. Elsewhere in the stronghold, one of the hooded members was peeking around the corner of an empty hallway. He looked around before hurrying off, discarding his mask to reveal his face. He was a normal-built man with dark brown hair with some clumps going down the right side of his head and gray eyes. He also had an eye patch on his right eye. The echoing chants made him grimace as he hurried away. For humanity's salvation, for humanity's salvation, for humanity's salvation, for humanity's salvation. The followers kept chanting as their leader held up a dagger in his right hand. Now then, let us begin, he declared, pressing the button upon the handle. The blade glowed brightly as it hummed, sending out a signal. Elsewhere, a device buzzed, with its lights changing from blue to purple in activation. It signaled to a large, box-shaped device that was within a sewer, glowing a bright red with the 6-leafed clover insignia of humarise upon it. All of a sudden, it expelled a greenish gas throughout the tunnels. Up on the city streets, manhole covers were bursting off as the gas spread. People hurried off in panic, unsure of what was happening. The gas was enveloping the entire metropolis, all while Flecht and his followers watched from the surveillance footage they had upon the holographic screens that appeared around them. Salem walked upon to his side. It's beautiful, Hansha, she remarked, getting his attention. Cleansing can be ugly, but you've turned it into something worthwhile, she pointed out. I humbly request that you only refer to me as Flecht, he insisted, causing her to blink in surprise. Hansha Furamuku is dead, he affirmed. The master of Grim huffed with a grin. Very well, Flecht turn, she said, continuing to watch the gas attack unfold. People in the city were starting to feel the effects. One man slowly took on a reptile-like appearance before actually becoming a turtle, falling unconscious onto the ground as his clothes fell with him. As a woman's mud-like hair spread about the ground, the brown feathers upon another man's arms grew into massive wings, making him scream in agony before he fell unconscious. One other woman melted completely, and yet another man erupted into flames. It was completely chaotic. In the middle of the city, there was a woman screaming for her life as her amplified power was creating a vortex that was essentially throwing people around left and right. One hero that was on the scene was affected by the gas as well. Red laser beams spewed out from his body, slicing through nearby buildings in powerful blasts. Pieces of those edifices collapsed onto busy streets, crushing cars and likely killing hundreds. Eventually, the whole city was left ablaze. Smoke was around every corner as some gas still lingered in the air. Fleck and his followers could hear the despaired screams of people from the monitors. Bodies lay about the streets as anyone with a quirk was left to die in this catastrophe. One man in the scrum was still alive, looking on with a horrified expression at what had happened. "Ah, hello there," a feminine voice greeted, causing him to yelp in surprise as he turned to see a member of humarise approaching him. "It seems you don't have a quirk," she noted, crouching down in front of him. "Congratulations," she said as she removed her mask, revealing her face. "You are one of the chosen who's been saved," she proclaimed. All the man could do was widen his eyes with horror. He didn't feel like was being saved at all. "And so the bait's set," Shura remarked with a chuckle. "Now all that's left is to make certain that they take it," Volley mentioned as he narrowed his eyes. "We're going to be sacrificing a lot of men," Xenon pointed out. "That won't matter, I'm sure," Salem affirmed, getting their attentions. "But perhaps we should up the stakes to bring them into the light," she proclaimed. "Flecked," she said, getting the humorized leader's attention as he turned to face her. "I have a suggestion," she noted as the gem at her forehead hummed a bright red. Part I. Two carrier planes soared across the skyline of the European country known as Othian, heading over the oddly shaped tower. Inside one, Ruby Rose took deep, long breaths to calm herself as she held her weapon in her lap in its storage mode. As she was trying to block out everything around her to focus, she could hear the foot tapping next to her. She glanced over in annoyance to see her sister, young Xiao Long, repeatedly tapping her right foot down against the floor. "Yang," she shouted in a whisper, causing her to flinch in surprise. "What? I'm ready to get going," she noted with a shrug. "This isn't like our usual missions back in the day." "Yang," a voice across from them pointed out, being Weiss Schnee as she was checking her Mirtenaster, which lied in her lap. "We're actually dealing with real people here," she mentioned seriously. "People who don't have auras," another voice added, belonging to Blake Belladonna as she was sitting beside her ex-heiress of a teammate. "Hey, I can hold back," Yang claimed as she raised her hands, earning an eye roll from her sister. "That doesn't sound like you in the slightest." "Xiao Long," someone else chimed in, being Inji Todoroki, also known as Endeavor. "Rest assured, you don't need to worry about going too easy on these people," he noted with crossed arms. "After what they've done, they don't deserve it," he added firmly. "Fair enough, Endeavor," Mo Kamaji agreed as she was seated beside him. "I'm just stoked that we're working with the Team Ruby," she pointed out with a big grin. "Oh, and your girlfriend," she whispered additionally, causing Enji to flinch in surprise. He glanced over to the woman seated to his left, being Raven Branwen. She glanced back at him for a moment before they both awkwardly looked away, blushing a little. "Okay, am I the only one that thinks this is super weird?" Ruby questioned quietly to her older sister. "Hey, I'm just glad my mom's somewhat of a better person," she responded, letting off a small smile. "Ha," Hero Branwen chuckled, sitting beside her. "Yeah, Raven's definitely not the same as we remember," he pointed out. "Even though it doesn't seem like she's aged a day," he mentioned as a remark. "I can hear you, Kiro," his sister grumbled from afar. "Can we please cut the cross chatter?" a feminine voice requested, belonging to a curvy woman with bright blue eyes, having a visor with two large blue-tinted lenses, and straight blonde hair with a brown patch stemming from her roots. She wore a form-fitting royal blue suit with a wide opening in the chest area, with the space being taken up by a high-collared white dress shirt. The suit had a dark magenta zipper going down the middle, and both of its short sleeves had the WA logo. She also wore thigh-high black boots with the same dark magenta line snaking down the legs, and strapped to her right thigh is a brown holster containing her pulse gun. "Director Nicholas Park should be contacting us shortly," she pointed out. "Right, sorry," Ruby apologized. At that moment, the screens beside the door to the cockpit both flashed on. "Greetings, heroes," the voice of a middle-aged man greeted. "I'd like to thank all of you for joining us in this upcoming endeavor," he pointed out, being a gray-haired man in a white coat who was standing alongside a suited All Might. For those unaware, we've gathered you together to work in various countries in response to a recent terrorist attack carried out in Prague, he explained. An image of the six-leafed clover insignia came upon the screens with a red background. The group claiming responsibility for the attack is known as Humarise, the director told the heroes in the cargo hold. This radical sect was founded by Hansha Firamuku, Akaflek Turn, and seeks to save humanity from the so-called quirk doomsday theory. He added an explanation as an image of the group's leader appeared upon the screens from a news broadcast's image. Hell of a look for a cultist, Kuro remarked quietly, causing his eldest niece to barely stifle a laugh. The attack used a quirk-activating substance known as Idiotrigger, the director mentioned, which was spread through the streets via devices we're dubbing trigger bombs, he told the group. Around the world, other hero teams had been gathered together. In Japan, Teishiro Toyomitsu, Tamaki Amajiki, Eijiro Kirishima, Tetsutetsu Tetsutetsu, Laura Kinney, Kyugo Sakamata, Hisashi Yamada, Ken Ishiyama, Kyoka Jiro, Mizo Shoji, Rachel Hagane, Shinra Kusakabe, and Arthur Boyle rode in trucks, and were hearing the director's message to all teams. In Egypt, the likes of Shinya Kamihara, Shinji Nishia, Yu Takeyama, Minoru Mainta, Hanta Siro, Minoru Mainta, Ibara Shiozaki, Riri Williams, Robbie Reyes, Tamaki Kotatsu, Ogun Montgomery, and Pert Copan were gathered in one of the cargo planes soaring over the pyramids. In France, several trucks labeled with the WA logo drove around the Arc de Triomphe. Inside were the likes of Ruko Tatsuma, joined by Neji Hato, Tsuyu Asui, Ochako Uraraka, Miles Morales, Shiki Granbell, Rebecca Bluegarden, Weiss Steiner, Hamura Kojsu, Happy, and M. Pino. Lastly, trucks were hurrying along the Golden Gate Bridge in the United States. Inside one were Mashirawa Jiro and Rikito Sato with the likes of Issei Hayato, Rias Gremory, Akino Haimjima, Asia Argento, Kaneko Tojo, and Zenobia Korda. Flying outside beside the trucks were Hawks and Fumikage Takoyami. The mission of the hero teams we've gathered is to search the 25 known humarise complexes so that these bombs can be destroyed, the director told the various teams. Intelligence suggests there's one device at each location, he mentioned. Arrest any humarise members present and neutralize the payload, he instructed. Be advised, you should expect heavy resistance, he added as a warning. They may detonate the bombs once they realize we're moving, he noted. As such, we're not asking local law enforcement to assist, he mentioned. This is the most urgent mission many of you have ever faced, he pointed out seriously, standing in the World Heroes Association headquarters command center. All Might, he said, turning to the former pro-hero, who nodded and put his left hand up to the communicator in his ear. Heroes, he began. The success or failure of this task rests on your shoulders, he stated firmly. Let's give smiles back to citizens who are frightened by terrorism, he declared. On cue, those gathered in the planes soaring over Othian stood up from the benches as the cargo doors slowly opened. Among those inside were Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, Raya Tennyson, and Shoto Todoroki. Each of them were dressed in dark, stealth-based costumes. The one-for-all inheritor's suit consisted of a neoprene polyester black suit with teal-green highlights on the lines, equipped with black iron soles and black boots. The arm braces were cut out to only his support gloves that were heavily mortified to be bulky enough to allow him to use long-range attacks, and his gloves and knee pads had teal-green bolts on them instead of yellow. The mask was redesigned to be all black with the exception of the teal-green lines of his respirator mask and the eyes on his hood, which were of the same color. The costume also included 2 silver plates on his shoulders, with the letters WA and 2 straps coming down from his upper body pads with a red button on the left. He pulled his hood up over his head. The suit of the explosion quirk user was similar to his winter costume, being neoprene black with the exception of orange X, the soles of his boots, and his gloves while retaining the metal knee pads, and his metallic neck brace had 2 holes on each side instead of 3. The green belt and the drop leg pouches were donned in black for the stealth mission. and the regular grenades he carried were replaced with orange flashbangs. The grenadier bracers were redesigned to be shaped like flashbang grenades rather than frag grenades. His mask was a normal jagged black design, but the hood has been designed to have the orange-rimmed flare shape protruded from the top. Furthermore, he had 2 silver plates on his shoulders with the letters WA and 2 straps coming down from his neck brace with a red button on the left. Adjusting his neck with a crick, he brought his hood up over his head. Reia's stealth costume was a neoprene black and blue, skin-tight suit with a black flak jacket that included a hood shaped with holes to fit her pony ears through whenever she activated her equestrian magic. Her footwear was much smaller as well, having iron soles. She also had a cowl that her somewhat tinted visor glasses were attached to, with her ears poking out through the openings. Taking a deep breath, she pulled her hood up over her head. Lastly, Shoto wore a neoprene black jacket and slim black pants that had built-in knee pads, a metal plate to regulate his body temperature, and the sleeves now longer. The boots had silver metal heels to get a firm grip on his ice. He had added black gauntlets that extended up to his elbows to keep control of his ice and fire to a minimum exposure. He also sported a black utility belt around his waist with silver ironings that holds little metal capsules containing medical supplies. The oversized hood he had showed silver metal outlines at the edge. Furthermore, his stealth costume came with 2 silver plates on his shoulders with the letters WA, and had 2 straps coming down from the hood, styled silver, and with a red button on the left. He pulled his hood up over his head, ready to start the mission with his classmates. Huh, Blake exhaled, making sure her gambol shroud was loaded with ammunition. As she did, Yang approached. So, she began, getting her attention. Care to explain what that whole thing with Hawks was from the other day? She inquired with a sly smirk. Her faunest teammate sighed. Yang, this really isn't the time, she grumbled out. Hey, this is gonna get done no sweat, the blonde-haired huntress proclaimed confidently, letting off a smirk. And I didn't know my teammate was such a cougar, she mentioned. A mad blush broke out upon Blake's face. Yang, she shouted. Ugh, Ruby groaned, smacking herself in the face. Okay, looks like we're good to go, Kuro noted as he stood at the edge of the ramp, feeling the wind rush through his hair. Huh, his youngest niece exhaled to calm herself, getting his attention. Been a while since we dropped out from something like this, huh? He guessed, giving her a grin that she returned. Let's move, everyone, she called out, pulling up her hood before being the first to run down and jump off of the ramp, descending toward the ground below. What a show-off, Yang muttered, jogging after her sister. Pot calling the kettle black, Weiss grumbled as she rolled her own eyes. She turned to Izuku and the other class of students. Icarus, you'll be with me and Blake, she told them. Yes, ma'am. The one for all inheritor responded with a nod. Ugh, Katsuki groaned. Why the hell do we even need a team name? He grumbled aloud in question. And why's Deku the first one? He inquired on angrily. Well, we are sort of a set group like Team Ruby, Reiya pointed out in reply, causing him to growl. Just don't fly too close to the sun, and you'll be good, Raven remarked in reassurance, getting his attention. With that, she and her brother were the next to jump out from the plane, taking on their corvid forms before they were followed by the other heroes and huntresses. This is it, heroes, the director called out through the communication line. Start your missions, he instructed. Team A, Angie yelled as he was soaring down alongside Mo and Claire, as the latter was aboard her flying squirrel-like hero of a sidekick. No matter what happens, collect the trigger bomb before it can be set off, he advised of them. Roger that, everyone on the communication line responded. Izuku glanced down to see the mansion that they were heading toward. There, he uttered out. Humarise's Athian headquarters, he noted aloud. While they handle the weapon, we're to take the facility and capture their leader, Flecht, Shoto pointed out over the communication line. Don't let your guards down, Icarus, he insisted of his classmates. What, you think we'd forget all that? Katsuki assumed as small explosions crackled off of his gloved hands. Shut up, he roared, blasting himself down toward the ground. Rhea ponied up as she gained a pair of wings, pony ears, and a long ponytail poking through her hood, while her skin turned a light cerulean. Shoto prepared flames over his left arm as he reared it back, while Izuku curled in his middle fingers, holding them back with his thumbs as the outer layers of his gloves jolted forward. While many of the heroes were using parachutes to slow their descents, the US students did so with their powers, joining together and following their mentor across the courtyard as Mo and Claire were heading towards the mansion. Stay back, one humarise member guarding the front doors with a staff in hand yelled. We won't let you past us, another proclaimed. As if on cue, a cluster of red rose petals zipped by them. It turned out to be Ruby, who hooked the two with her crescent rose and threw them aside as they tumbled across the concrete porch. Go, she called out to her colleagues. Enji blasted the doors down, being followed by Mo and Claire as they hurried through the halls. Claire, track down the device. The Hellflame quirk user called out to the blonde-haired hero. I'm on it, she responded, closing her eyes and then opening them as they shined a bright red. Voyance, she exclaimed. She could see through the walls around her, though she couldn't immediately detect a sign of the device in question. Back outside, several of the humarise members had come out with assault rifles at the ready, firing onto the incoming heroes. Fortunately, they were protected by an array of white glyphs that deflected the bullets. They were projected by Weiss, who held out her Mirtenaster. Yang then blasted herself over with shots from her Ember Celica and prosthetic arm. She slammed her fists into two of the humarise members, shattering their masks as they were sent flying into their comrades, crashing onto the ground. One member attempted to fire onto her from behind, but was promptly kicked down by Kuro as he had transformed back from his corvid form. He drew his harbinger from his back, setting it into its scythe form. As more humarise members poured out into the courtyard, he and his nieces promptly took them down with ease. We need reinforcements, one of them cried out desperately. Quick, contact! Another member's shout was cut off as his assault rifle was shot out from his hands, followed by several others being knocked away. They all were trying to comprehend what had just happened until they saw a figure land in front of them. If you're going to play with fire, you better be ready to get burned, Takisa Hanawa remarked, wearing his bunker gear and holding a pair of pistols in his hands. The humarise members were left flabbergasted by how quickly they had gotten subdued by the lieutenant. They're violating our sanctuary, a soldier yelled from the porch, being joined with others on the charge to stop the invaders. However, they found themselves halted as ice froze over their legs, keeping them in place. Shoto surfed by on an ice wave, following Katsuki as he propelled himself along with his explosions. Bakugo, most of their members are quirkless. The half-cold, half-hot quirk user pointed out to his classmate as they were closing in on more men. Don't be too rough, he insisted. Yeah, I know, he responded in annoyance, throwing his arms back over his head as an orange glow came off of his gloved hands. Stun grenade, he exclaimed, unleashing a powerful blast of light that blinded the incoming humarise members. That allowed for Shoto to swing his right arm and easily trap all of them in a wave of ice, passing by and continuing around the courtyard. Raven had transformed back from her corvid form, running through the halls of the mansion before turning a corner and coming across more soldiers wielding staffs. With a scoff, she clicked the trigger of her omen, causing the sword to shoot out from the scabbard. It struck a humarise member squarely in the stomach with its hilt, ricocheting into the spring maiden's grasp as she jumped up to retrieve it. She came down and slashed a soldier's staff in half, knocking him aside before pivoting around and slamming her weapon's hilt into another member's stomach. He let out a pained grunt as he fell down. Raven huffed, but then felt something strike her in the back as she yelped. She clenched her teeth together, turning to find another group of humarise members closing in on her, firing their guns aimlessly. TCH, she scoffed, letting reddish flames of energy trail out from her eyes. Fine, she muttered, dashing forward in a burst of wind. She passed her incoming enemies, freezing their feet to the ground in ice, while also slicing apart their weapons. Who, she exhaled, hurrying off to find anyone else in the building. Heroes were taking on the cultists with relative ease. A bumblebee-themed hero had her red fingernails grow and sharpen into spikes, which she tossed out to pin her foes to the walls. Another hero was using a violin bow in the indentations on his left arm, playing an enchanting song as musical notes floated about near him. Humarise members who went to confront him were immediately falling unconscious from hearing the tune. All seemed to be going well. However, Endeavor, there's something wrong, Claire exclaimed into the communication line, still aboard her sidekick as they were gliding around the courtyard. I can't find the bomb anywhere, she pointed out. What's that? The Hellflame quirk user yelled as his right hand was up against his ear. TCH, he scoffed in frustration. Where's Flecht? He questioned. We're about to close in on him. One hero answered as part of a group that Izuku, Rhea, and Blake were with, running down a long hallway. Once he's captured, make him tell you where the bomb is, NG advised. Roger, the lead hero responded. Flecht turn is in that room, Izuku noted inwardly, keeping his fists clenched as green sparks of electricity crackled around him. Just then, Rhea noticed something. Up ahead, she yelled, spotting a pair of humarise members at the double doors. One held a rocket launcher over his right shoulder. For humanity's salvation, he bellowed, pulling the trigger. The rocket blasted forward, heading towards the incoming group as it didn't appear like they'd have a moment to dodge. A large explosion occurred, causing some of the nearby pillars to crumble apart. Smoke lingered as the two humarise members seemed relieved that they had stopped their foes. But once the veil settled, they were shocked to find a pair of metal hunks hovering in front of the heroes, with 08 emblazoned upon both of them. That's impossible, the other member gasped. Fire Dragon. A voice started to bellow, causing him to whip around too late to see Natalie Dragneel coming toward him, rearing her right leg back as it was cloaked in flames. Talon, she roared, kicking him back hard into a wall. He slumped down it onto the floor, groaning as he fell unconscious. His colleague panicked, trying to ready another rocket onto the launcher. However, his right wrist was grabbed by a gloved hand. He slowly looked up to see Maki O's there, clad in her bunker gear as she glowered down at him. She merely chopped at his nape with her right hand, rendering him unconscious as he fell down. All clear, she called out to the heroes. Thanks for the assist, one of them said in gratitude as they ran by. Yeah, thanks Natalie and Maki, Izuku exclaimed with a smile. The second-generation fire soldier widened her eyes and blushed upon hearing her name, shaking a little. She recomposed herself, though, following the others as they burst through the doors. The room they entered appeared to be a darkened study, with a humarized tapestry at the back behind a desk. But no one else was inside. Damn it! The lead hero cursed in realization. Their leader's gone, he muttered out. Search the premises, he instructed, enticing some of the other heroes to hurry off. He must have known that the heroes were coming, Izuku realized, taking off his hood. But why would he leave his followers behind? His girlfriend asked as she approached him, while Rhea landed next to them. Probably to try and throw us off, the equestrian magic user assumed as she removed her hood. That could mean they moved the bomb, too, she added. So did we just get sent on a wild goose chase? Natalie guessed. No one responded, seemingly frustrated by how they weren't able to complete either of their intended objectives yet. At that moment, Blake felt her cat ears stick up in alarm. Hey, do any of you hear that? She asked of the others, getting their attentions. Wait, yeah, Rhea replied, narrowing her eyes in concentration as her ears picked up a noise. It sounds like growling, she noted. "Arr." A voice growled, causing everyone to immediately take on ready stances as a precaution. "Endeavor, are we sure that there are only humarise members here?" Blake asked as she put her right index and middle fingers up against her communicator. The flame hero blinked in surprise upon hearing her question from another section of the building. "What do you mean, Bella?" "Endeavor, we've got a big problem," Claire screamed over the communication line, interrupting him. "What is it?" he questioned, floating down onto the floor alongside Mao. "I'm picking up dozens of life signatures right below the mansion that I didn't just now." The Voyance quirk user responded. "Wait, they're coming up." The feed suddenly cut out. "Claire," NG yelled. "Endeavor, over there," Mo cried out, pointing toward the floor ahead of them as it suddenly burst open. Dark, shadowy figures jumped out, landing in front of the two heroes. The Hellflame quirk user widened his eyes to see that they were Beringels, who each pounded their chests and roared. "Grim," he uttered, clenching his teeth together. "X. France." "Ha! What the hell?" Weiss screamed as he barely managed to gun down a sentinel that popped out of the ground behind him with the rifle in his hands. "Where'd these things even come from?" he asked frantically, re-aiming his weapon upward to shoot up at a Nevermore overhead. NegaiFreak flew over and blasted it back with her yellow waves of twisting energy. "I did not detect these creatures until this very moment," Pino answered before she was ensnared by Tsuyu's long tongue, being yanked away just as another sentinel popped up near where she stood. "Thank you, Miss Tsu," the little android exclaimed with gratitude to the frog quirk user, who placed her upon her left shoulder for the time being. "We weren't briefed on monsters being at the base, Ribbit," she noted, hopping up onto the walls of the alleyway she was in as a Beowulf came after her. However, it was immediately cut down by the red energy blade in Homura's hand, fading into ashes. "They seem to be quite fragile, though," she pointed out as she narrowed her eyes. "Don't let a single one escape the compound," Ruko called out from above, getting her attention as she spotted the Dragoon hero gliding about before swiping at a Turix, knocking it out of the sky. "We can't put any of the citizens at risk," she bellowed out, having to wrestle with a Nevermore that soared toward her. "Erg," Rebecca grunted, carrying a pair of twin blasters she used to fire onto lancers buzzing about. "Rebecca, I think I'm starting to run low here," Happy noted to get her attention for a moment. All of a sudden, a sentinel burst out of the ground behind her. She whipped around and gasped, looking to be too late to stop it. However, a large slab of concrete fell down and crushed it in an instant, resulting in a flurry of dust. As it settled, the Cat Leaper Ether Gear user looked to see Ochako floating down to land on top of the slab, tapping her fingertips together. "Thanks, Ochako," she exclaimed with gratitude. Back in the air, the Nevermore took hold of Ruko's right wing with its beak, flinging her aside. She crashed against the roof of the nearby headquarters, grimacing as she slowly tried to sit up. The Grim was coming toward her with its talons at the ready. But all of a sudden, something crashed into it from above. It turned to be Shiki, who had a greenish light building around him. "Majimech attack," he started to roar. "Gravity center," he echoed, slamming the Nevermore down onto the nearby courtyard in a huge burst of dirt and dust. When it settled, it revealed him standing in a crater, as the Nevermore had already disintegrated from taking so much damage. "Shiki," Ochako called out, causing him to perk up to see her and Rebecca running over, with the latter having Happy on her shoulder, as he had transformed back to normal. "Was that all of them?" the Satan Gravity Ether Gear user inquired aloud. "If not, then we gotta make sure they don't get out of here like Rukiu said," Rebecca advised. "Right," Ochako agreed with a nod. The three of them then split up to cover the rest of grounds, all while Ruko took to the skies again. Already, the situation was dire with such horrible weapons in the hands of humarise. But with these monsters, things were even worse. United States. "Hawks, what did you just say?" the director's voice exclaimed in the earpiece of the wing hero, who was using a blade-like feather to cut down sabers in the courtyard of the humarise base he had gone to with his group. "Yeah, they're grim," he answered, having to fly back to avoid getting swiped at. "Director, this is changing the game here," he pointed out with a grimace. "If humarise is allied with Kronos, then—" "Hawks, watch out," Fumigage yelled, interrupting his mentor as he seemingly turned around too late to see a Turix about to snatch him. However, a dark red burst of light knocked it aside, sending it crashing into a wall as it faded into ashes moments afterward. Hawks looked over and let out a chuckle to see Rias there with her devilish wings floating beside him. "We'll make sure none of these things escape," she promised, flying off. "Thanks," the wing hero responded, landing on the ground and putting his hand against his left ear. "Yeah, Director Park," he said somewhat grimly. "I think humarise at least has a benefactor in Salem." He noted over the communication line back at the WA main headquarters. There, All Might clenched his fists tightly. "Salem," he growled inwardly. "Ha!" Akino exclaimed as she unleashed a powerful bolt of yellow lightning onto a pack of sabers, resulting in an electrifying blast. As Asia was tending to wounded heroes with a greenish, healing aura coming off of her body onto theirs, Kaneko was punching a Beowulf into a wall, while Zenobia swung her Durandal to slash down a few lancers. Does someone in their ranks have the ability to conjure up such foul beasts with a specific quirk? The blue-haired swordswoman wondered aloud. "Probably," the Nekomata bluntly answered as she landed a powerful uppercut onto a saber that was charging toward her, knocking it away. "At any rate, they seem to be focused on trying to fight us," she pointed out. "Then could this have all been a trap?" Zenobia inquired emphatically. "Dunno," Kaneko blankly replied again. However, her expression changed into one of horror. "Asia, watch out," she screamed. The Bishop of Ria's peerage perked up, turning her head to see a Beowulf about to pounce onto her. "Ah," she shrieked out, bracing herself as it didn't seem like anyone was going to get to her in time. However, "Sugar rush," Rakido exclaimed as he lunged in, repeatedly ramming his fists against the grim to send it tumbling away before it faded into ashes. Thank you," Asia stammered with gratitude, earning a smile in response from the Sugar Rush quirk user. Meanwhile, Mashiro was hopping about, avoiding the acidic spit of a Senator as it generated a green, gaseous smog upon striking the ground. He looked around carefully, failing to notice a pair of sentinels popping out of the ground behind him. "Explosion!" a voice suddenly exclaimed, causing him to perk up in surprise before something came down and slammed the centipede-like grim against the earth, making them burst into ashes. As the dust settled, the tail quirk user looked to see Ize there with his boosted gear over his left arm. The green gem upon it glowed brightly. "Hey, watch it," he yelled in warning to Mashiro, causing him to whip around and see that the Senator was still standing, ready to fire another spray of acid. At that moment, though, Fumigage soared in with dark shadow wrapped around him. Two large, shadowy claws enveloped his hands as he headed toward the grim. Seeing that, Issei smirked as he charged forward as well. "Ah, hey," Mishirao yelped. The Senator unleashed another spray of acid toward the incoming boosted gear user. However, he swiftly evaded it with a quick hop to the side, continuing his charge. The Grim was prepared to attack again, but was suddenly struck from behind by Fumigage, who slashed by him. What followed was Issei closing in and rearing his left arm back. "Later, doucher," he bellowed, thrusting his armored fist into the Senator's face. It imploded into ashes, causing the pawn of Ria's peerage to stumble forward before managing to catch himself. He exhaled a sigh of relief afterward. "Nice job, you two," Mashiro complimented as he approached, while Fumigage had dark shadow retract back into him. "I can't think of how we'd be able to handle monsters like these without powers as strong as yours around," he admitted, sheepishly scratching at his right cheek. "Did any of those monsters escape the compound?" The dark shadow quirk user wondered aloud. "Doubt it," Issei chimed. Ria's and those other heroes'll make sure of that, he affirmed confidently with the grin. Then let's make sure to back them up, Mashirao insisted. Right, the boosted gear wielder responded, heading off with him and Fumikage to go and deal with the other Grimm in the immediate area. Singapore. Orewa! Rumi Yuzajama yelled as she landed a fierce axe kick onto a Turks, slamming it hard against the ground. Ha, she chuckled out. Least I don't have to hold back against these freaks, she proclaimed excitedly as she saw a pair of sabers charging toward her. However, they were immediately eviscerated by golden rays of light shot from above. The rabbit hero looked up to see Sunset Shimmer soaring overhead with her angelic amber wings, having a golden aura around her hands. Don't let them get anywhere out of the vicinity, Rumi, she called out in instruction to the rabbit quirk user. Who died and made you boss? She yelled back. Meanwhile, Alice Fullbuster had water expelling from the soles of her feet as she flew about the street in which some Ursai had gone down. She formed a giant long sword of ice in her hands, gripping it tightly. Cold, Excalibur, she exclaimed, bisecting one of the Grimm's head from its body, effectively killing it as it faded into ashes. She managed to take down two more before a third closed in on her, ready to pounce. All of a sudden, though, it was blasted aside by a huge gush of water. Alice landed upon the street, turning and giving off a small smile. It was one of the Singapore heroes, being a seemingly well-built man. He had the head of a lion, and presumably webbed feet. For his hero costume, he wore a sleeveless, light blue wetsuit with a belt that has a design reminiscent of flowing water. He also had arm guards that went up to his elbows, along with shoulder pads that each had the Singaporean flag on them. He also sported a small domino mask. Thank you, Big Red Dot, the ice and water mage called out in gratitude before hurrying off. Elsewhere in the vicinity, Momo Yayurazu was swinging a sword she had created to swipe at a saber that attempted to pounce on her. After she killed it, she saw that others were closing in on her. She grimaced with clenched teeth, but then perked up as she noticed a figure landing down in front of her, being none other than Esta Soteria as he held onto his demon slayer sword. A blackness spread from his hand all the way to his head, granting him a scar-like marking with a scarlet right eye, a devilish horn, and a wing upon his back. The incoming Grimm roared as he reared his right arm back. Black, he began to bellow, taking a deep breath. Hurricane, he yelled, spinning around rapidly and slashing through the shadowy beasts, turning them into ashes. As the dust slowly settled, Momo let out a breath of relief. Nicely done, Soteria, she complimented. Yeah, thanks, he responded with a grin. But, do you know what the heck's even going on? He inquired. The creation quirk user shook her head. It doesn't seem like even the humarise members knew that these monsters would be attacking us, she noted inwardly. Perhaps this was random, she guessed, or maybe there's more to this than meets the eye, she grimly concluded. Yikes, Setsuna Takage yelped, having to separate herself into multiple pieces in order to avoid getting slashed by an Ursa. Seriously, what are these things? She questioned frantically. Don't lose focus, Setsuna, a voice called out, getting her attention as she turned her head to see Enma Kanagi, also known as Majestic, floating beside her aboard a platform of ring-shaped energy. Majestic, the lizard tail splitter quirk user exclaimed. We may not be powerful enough to stop these foes ourselves, her mentor admitted. But we can let our friends of the multiverse deal the damage for us, he pointed out. At that moment, the Ursa was struck at its underside from a fist that shot out from its shadow. It tumbled back, getting back up and shaking its head. Emerging from the ground was Christina Cheney, who looked at the Grimm with disinterest, even as it roared. A shadowy aura cloaked her right arm. Shadow Dragon, she began, swiping by the Ursa. Black slash, she uttered. The Grimm collapsed onto the ground, fading onto ashes. From afar, Setsuna's eyes shook. Whoa, she uttered out. Up in the skies above, Noel Silva was donning her watery Valkyrie armor, soaring about and luring away a pair of Turexes. One tried to swipe at her from above, but she took notice, rolling out of the way and piercing it with her watery lance, killing it as its body faded into ashes. The other Grimm tried to take a different approach by attacking from the side, but was promptly blasted out of the sky by a golden beam of light. The Black Bull watched as Sunset flew over, gliding beside her. "Nice job," she complimented, causing Noel to blink in surprise before she blushed a little. Well, of course it was," she stammered in claim. "I'm royalty after all," she pointed out as she turned her head away. "Why wouldn't I do a good job?" she inquired rhetorically. "Technically, I'm royalty, too," Sunset noted, causing her to perk up in surprise. "But you don't hear me bragging about it," she mentioned before flying off. "Wah, I wasn't bragging," Noel yelled, soaring after the equestrian magic user. Back on the ground, the ponied-up form of Mackenzie Tate Gummy took hold of a Beowulf by its right arm, throwing it hard against the ground over her shoulder. A Turex was about to come down and snatch her with its talons, but it wound up kicked aside by the metal-plated right foot of Rumi, bursting into ashes upon impact with a nearby wall. "At least we're keeping him here," the dark green-haired girl noted as she brushed her nose with her right thumb. "Yeah," the rabbit hero agreed, narrowing her eyes. "So that bitch from 4040's here working with humarise, huh?" she assumed, or at least, "she's using those bastards for something," she corrected inwardly before hurrying off. Around the world, the heroes were all battling back the monstrous creatures of Grimm. Though they were faring well, a nightmare scenario was being proven to those fighting. Othian. "I can't believe Salem's working with humarise," Yang yelled angrily, following Ruby and Kuro down the halls of the base. "Grimm aren't going to be too much of a problem for us," her uncle pointed out as they rounded a corner. "But the heroes are going to be in trouble if we don't do something," his youngest niece noted aloud. "Meaning your silver eyes might have to really do their job," Kuro mentioned as a remark out of concern. "I'll be fine, Uncle Kuro," Ruby assured in response, immediately bursting into a red cluster of rose petals as she rocketed forward. She turned a corner, entering a foyer festering with Grimm that were about to maul a few of the heroes, including Claire and her sidekick. The Team RWBY leader's eyes shined a bright silver, with a bright flash of light washing over the room. As the Voyance quirk user opened her eyes, she blinked in shock to find that all of the shadowy monsters had been reduced to ashes. Landing in front of her with her crescent rose drawn was Ruby, who winced momentarily. She then determinedly shot forward, being joined by her uncle and her sister as they charged towards more of the Grimm. "Where the hell did these things even come from?" Katsuki yelled, firing off several blasts from his gloved palms at a half-dozen lancers buzzing after him. Meanwhile, Shoto unleashed ice waves to trap Ursai and Beowulfs that were coming toward him. However, lancers were also going after him as well. "Damn it," he cursed, quickly thrusting his left arm out to unleash a blast of fire, engulfing two of the wasp-like Grimm. Three of them shot out their stingers, about to pierce through the half-cold, half-hot quirk user. Thankfully, a large white glyph appeared in front of him in the nick of time, deflecting the stingers. "Shoto," Weiss called out, getting his attention as he saw her skate over via her glyphs. "Shoot your fire into that glyph," she instructed quickly. Blinking in realization and nodding, the half-cold, half-hot quirk user had fire spew out from his left arm again. He unleashed another blast into the glyph at the angle it was at, and the flames erupted into a massive plume, engulfing all of the lancers closing in on him and incinerating them instantaneously. Meanwhile, Enji flew out from the base's entrance, as two Beringels were after him. One took a great leap to reach him, only for him to thrust his right fist into its chest. With a loud grunt, the flame hero unleashed a concentrated beam of fire through the gorilla-like Grimm, causing it to roar with agony before it disintegrated completely. The other Beringel pounded its chest angrily, watching the Hellflame quirk user descend onto the ground before charging toward him. However, a figure landed between the two, being none other than Raven. With a quick draw of her omen, which now had a yellow blade of electric dust, she let her eyes flare up before slashing past the Grim in an instant. Sparks of electricity came off of its body, followed by it collapsing into ashes on the ground. The Spring Maiden turned to her boyfriend and nodded. He nodded back. "Claire, are there any more Grim in the area?" he inquired as he put his hand onto the communicator in his right ear. "Ruby and Kuro are helping us deal with the ones inside," the Voyance quirk user communicated. "But I believe there's a pack of sorts heading from where the capture team was going," she told him. "Copy that," he replied. Afterwards, he and Raven blasted off back toward the building. In the meantime, Katsuki was starting to grow frustrated as the Lancers were still on his tail. After another blast to propel himself forward, he flipped himself around. "Point-blank range," he began as he sneered, pulling the pin on his right bracer. "Max stun grenade," he exclaimed, unleashing a bright, powerful blast of explosive light that engulfed the Lancers after him. He huffed with a grin as he landed, brushing his left thumb across his nose smugly. From afar, Shoto looked over and widened his eyes. "Bakugo, watch out," he yelled. "Huh?" the explosion quirk user uttered in confusion. He turned to see a Turix coming toward him with its talons at the ready. He was about to fire off a blast onto it, but then he heard glass shatter. Yang had leapt through a window, setting her Ember Celica gauntlet into a defensive form. She grabbed the Grim by its left wing, firing a few shots to propel herself as she spun around with it, slamming it down hard against the ground. As it dissipated into ashes, Katsuki could only look on with a stunned expression. "Phew," Yang exhaled with relief, wiping the sweat off of her brow with her prosthetic arm. "Now that was fun," she remarked as she grinned. "WH," the explosion quirk user uttered out, trembling as he clenched his teeth together. "TH, that was my move," he stammered in claim, getting the blonde-haired huntress' attention as she blinked in surprise. However, she cracked a cheeky grin. "I've been doing that move since you were a kid, explosion boy," she pointed out smugly, putting her hands onto her hips. "If anything, that makes you a fan of me," she mentioned as she approached. "Though I already knew that," she added with a giggle, patting him teasingly on the head. An angry and embarrassed blush came across his cheeks as he had no way to defend himself from her points. "Where's Ruby?" Weiss asked as she came over alongside Shoto. "Inside, dealing with the other Grim," Yang answered. "Honestly, we're lucky we're not dealing with a Nevermore or something like that," she pointed out as she glanced off to the side. "Do you really want to jinx us?" the ex-heiress inquired rhetorically. At that moment, they heard a rumbling from nearby. They looked back over to the building to see the wall suddenly burst open, with Izuku and Blake jumping back. "Midoriya?" Shoto exclaimed in surprise, seeing the freckled teen land down alongside the cat faunist. They looked toward the huge hole in the wall, seeing the herd of megalithics charging out, with an alpha tailing behind them. "How many kinds of freaky monsters are there?" Katsuki questioned, sounding frustrated. "Apparently enough to make this harder than it needed to be," Weiss grumbled in response as she glared over at Young, who winced before chuckling sheepishly. One of the mammoth-like Grim trumpeted as its brethren charged towards the others. However, it was suddenly knocked aside by both Rhea and Natalie, who slammed into it feet first. It fell over in a heap, letting out a pained trumpet. As it tried to get up, the Tekyo shot out and crushed it against the stone walkway beneath it, making it burst into ashes. "Huh." Maki breathed in relief from afar as her equipment flew back to her side. "That's one down," she noted. "Maki, heads up," Natalie called out, getting her attention in the nick of time as she quickly moved the Tekyo to shield herself from being struck by another megalith's trunk. Shoto unleashed a wave of ice from his right foot, attempting to entrap the Grim. However, they easily broke free, continuing their charge. "They're too strong," the half-cold, half-hot quirk user pointed out with a grimace. Hold the line, Weiss instructed to his surprise. I just need a little bit of time to get this ready, she noted aloud. Got it, Young replied with a nod. Let's go, explosion boy, she called out to Katsuki before blasting forward. Don't tell me what to do, he stuttered angrily, shooting himself after her. In the meantime, one of the Megaliaths attempted to stomp on Izuku, who quickly hopped away, taking a great leap into the air. Dark energy tendrils with a teal outline emerged from the sights on his gloves, extending out and wrapping around the grim. They held it in place as it trumpeted angrily, wriggling to try and free itself. Erg. The One for All inheritor growled through clenched teeth, having the energy tendrils remain firmly wrapped around his foe's body. Rhea, now, he called out. Up above, the equestrian magic user assumed a ready position as she flapped her wings. She shot down in an instant, leaving behind a sonic boom in her wake in primary colors. Rainboom impact, she exclaimed, striking the Megaliath feet first like an arrow. It trumpeted in pain before completely disintegrating into ashes. In the meantime, Blake flipped about, avoiding the trunk swings of another Grim as she readied her katana and cleaver. It swung at her again, but Yang shot herself in and caught its trunk in her arms. Her Faunus teammate used both of her blades to bisect the trunk, causing the Megaliath to cry out in agony. Now it's my turn, Katsuki declared as he blasted himself over. I don't have to hold back against you, you elephant freak, he roared with a wicked grin, holding out both of his palms as they glowed brightly. He roared, unleashing a massive blast that completely engulfed the Grim, eviscerating it into ashes. Ha, he chuckled afterward. I see why he likes you, Blake remarked over to Young, causing her to grin. Elsewhere, Shoto was riding a wave of ice as a pair of Megaliaths were charging after him. He swung his left arm back to release a stream of fire onto them, but they seemed unaffected as they continued their pursuit. Pain doesn't matter to these creatures, especially since they're created to feast on fear, he noted to himself as he grimaced. All of a sudden, a flurry of bullets rained in, striking one of the Grim around its legs. It fell over in a heap, sliding to a stop as its brethren kept going. Blinking in surprise, the half-cold, half-hot quirk user glanced over to see Takisa hurrying over, now with a submachine gun. Lieutenant Hinawa, he called out. At that moment, the Megaliath still in pursuit of him slammed its trunk against the ice, knocking him down as he tumbled over the courtyard. He came to a stop upon his stomach as he grimaced, pushing himself up. The Grim continued its charge toward him. The fire soldier was prepared to fire onto it to protect Shoto. However, a large broadsword suddenly came down and pierced through the Megaliath's back into the ground, originating from an Arma Gigas summon. A weak trumpet was all it could muster before it faded into ashes. The half-cold, half-hot quirk user brought himself up to his knees, letting out a few exhausted breaths. He then noticed a familiar gloved hand being offered to him, causing him to perk up and see Weiss holding it out to him as she smiled. He smiled back. Thank you, Miss Schnee, he said with gratitude, taking her hand and letting her lift him back up onto his feet. Meanwhile, Natalie was expelling flames from her feet as she was flying around a Megaliath that had its sights on her. It tried to strike her with its trunk, but she was quick to dodge it as she rolled aside. It's gonna take more than the Tiger Crush sign to take this guy out, she realized, narrowing her eyes slightly. In that case, she continued inwardly, letting off a grin as flew down underneath the Grim, pressing her sandaled feet against its underside. She then made her hands both form the sign of the horns, sticking them out. Fire Dragon, she started to bellow. Cornatalon, she roared, unleashing a powerful, explosive blast of fire in the form of a dragon's head. It engulfed the Megaliath entirely, causing it to disintegrate into ashes after a pained trumpet. Looks like we're making quick work, Young pointed out with an excited grin as she blasted over to land beside Blake. All that's left is the big one, she noted, seeing the alpha Megaliath getting attacked simultaneously by the Maki-controlled Tekayo and Katsuki's explosions. Damn it. The latter of the two cursed, firing off blast after blast onto the mammoth like Grim. This one's definitely a lot tougher than the others. The fire soldier noted as sweat was dripping down her face. Hey, Gorilla Cyclops, Katsuki yelled, getting her attention as she blinked in surprise. Can't you take this damn elephant out? He questioned loudly. I thought you were supposed to be the strong one, he pointed out. Maki's expression twisted into a viciously brutish one. Who are you calling a gorilla Cyclops? She roared out, swinging her arms forward. Her flying hammers shot out at the alpha Megaliath. However, it took notice, using its tusks to knock them away. One of them was heading right toward the fire soldier. Maki, Izuku exclaimed as he dove in and grabbed her, pulling her aside before she could wind up getting hit as the flying hammer crashed into the headquarters. With that, the Grim turned its attention onto Katsuki, who grimaced. "Aw, hell," he grumbled, firing off blast after blast onto it. Unfortunately, they proved to be ineffective as the alpha Megaliath swung its trunk to swat him up into the air. Rhea flew up and caught him from behind in a grunt. Damn it, he cursed in frustration. The Grim trumpeted down below, enduring the slashes of the Arma-Gigas summon as they pushed against each other. Didn't Ruby take one of these big guys out before? Young inquired loudly as she stood alongside Weiss and Blake. Yeah, with help, the ex-heiress recalled, closing her eyes to concentrate. Look, whether or not we can kill it, we have to keep it from making its way out of the compound, she advised seriously. Let's try getting under it, Blake suggested, setting her Gambol shroud into its pistol form. Yeah, good call, Young agreed, blasting herself forward with a pair of shots from her gauntlet and her prosthetic arm. The alpha Megaliath trumpeted mightily again, bringing up its front legs. As the Arma-Gigas summon was prepared to slash its stomach with its broadsword, the Grim suddenly slammed its feet down, causing the ground around it to shatter apart. The knight-like entity tumbled over the ground from the impact's force, vanishing into white ashes. Blake and Young passed by them, closing in on the behemoth. It was ready to swing its trunk, but suddenly found its left legs getting trapped in ice, courtesy of Shoto. Takeisa was standing right next to him, firing repeatedly onto the alpha Megaliath as it trumpeted angrily. As it broke out from the ice, the blonde-haired huntress launched herself up and struck it in the face repeatedly with her fists, leaving behind several sticky grenades as she jumped back. Thrusting her arms backwards, she made the grenades explode simultaneously. However, she was suddenly met with a trunk to her stomach, causing her yellow aura to shimmer as she slid back along the ground. In the meantime, the cat Faunus made her way around the Grim, holding her weapon by its ribbon. Rhea, she called out, getting the attention of the equestrian magic user as she was flying down alongside Katsuki. With a blink of realization, she dashed out and took hold of Blake's Gambol shroud, wrapping its ribbon around the behemoth's back legs. Both she and the cat Faunus held it tightly from both ends, clenching their teeth. The alpha Megaliath was prepared to lift its legs up once again to attack, but they were encased in ice before it could, with Shoto and Weiss providing the waves to trap it. With an angered trumpet, it was ready to shatter the ice with its trunk, but was stopped as Young caught it, having her eyes shine a bright red as her hair glowed and flickered like flames. Come on, she yelled out. From above, Katsuki came down onto the Grim's back and unleashed a powerful blast from his hands. At the same time, both of Maki's Tekio hammers shot out, striking the behemoth at both sides simultaneously. Take this, Natalie roared, cloaking her right fist mightily in flames before punching the alpha Megaliath in the face. With all the attacks it had endured thus far, it was remarkable that it was even still standing. However, it seemed as if it'd all be over with one last attack. Charging in and taking a mighty leap into the air, Izuku reared his right leg back. Shoot style, he began inwardly. All of a sudden, though, the alpha megalith swung its trunk to knock both Young and Natalie off of it, while also shattering the ice around its legs. Shit! The blonde-haired huntress cursed. The Grim then took notice of the incoming Izuku, striking him with its right tusk to send him tumbling high up into the air. Deku! His girlfriend screamed out. Seeing what was happening, Blake immediately pulled back her gambol shroud into her grasp. She crouched down and leapt up, holding her weapon by its ribbon and spinning it around like a lasso before throwing it up toward where the one-for-all inheritor was going. He spotted the incoming weapon, grasping it with his gloved right hand. That allowed for the cat faunus to land down and pull on the ribbon with a mighty tug. The alpha megalith trumpeted loudly with anger again, blowing each of its foes back. But it had yet to realize that Izuku was coming down toward it. He raised his right leg up as the green sparks around him crackled. Manchester, so mama, delivering a fierce and devastating axe kick to the Grim's back. It let out a loud, pained trumpet as it could feel its foe's iron-soled foot breaking through its skin and tearing down its body. Ultimately, it burst into a cloud of black smoke. The one-for-all inheritor landed upon the ground, breathing heavily. We did it, Natalie realized, falling onto her bottom as she sighed deeply with relief. Gah, Mackie groaned, kneeling down exhaustedly. That was almost as tough as a demon, she grumbled out. So these monsters are from another world? Shoto inquired aloud as he stared at the cloud of black smoke. Ours, to be specific, Weiss chimed in as an answer, getting his attention. Which definitely brings a lot of concern to the table, she mentioned grimly as she narrowed her eyes, putting her right hand onto her chin. If Salem's in this universe, then what is she plotting? She wondered curiously with concern. Are you okay, Izuku? Blake asked of the one-for-all inheritor as she approached alongside Rhea, who deactivated her equestrian magic in a flash of light. Yeah, just a little sore, he replied, wrapping his left arm around his stomach. I can't believe that humarise is working with Salem, Rhea grumbled out, getting the attentions of those next to her. Does that mean the Chronos Alliance is involved somehow? She assumed. Possibly, Blake answered with narrowed eyes. In the meantime, we can be thankful that we made it out okay, she noted, glancing over skeptically toward Young. No sweat, huh? She remarked with crossed arms. Her teammate flinched, realizing that her claims back on the plane likely jinxed them. Heh, she chuckled out, rubbing the back of her head sheepishly. In the end, even though we raided the humarized buildings around the world, we couldn't find a single trigger bomb. Thankfully, we were able to round up all their members present and stop any of the released Grim from attacking citizens. But that only raised more questions. Back in the United States, Kaneko made sure the bindings around the humarized members she and the others had rounded up were tight. She and the rest of the Occult Research Club members were amongst the heroes and work-study students, having taken care of the Grim that had been released while also tending to others that had gotten injured. Riaz narrowed her eyes as she stared at the cultists they had captured. Something wrong, Riaz? Her boyfriend asked. It's just something about all this feels like a plot conducted by the Chaos Brigade, she answered after a moment. Seeing as how Grim are involved, Fumikage chimed in as he approached, getting her attention. I would not be surprised if another powerful foe from a universe beyond ours came to challenge us, he confessed. We still have to worry about finding those bombs, Zenobia pointed out. Easier said than done, apparently, Ize grumbled as he looked over to Hawks, who was in the middle of giving his report to the World Heroes Association via his communicator. Yeah, he said with his gloved right hand over his ear. We interrogated the members we rounded up. But it's no use, he informed. They got no clue where the devices are being kept, he stated. Doesn't seem like they even knew the things or the Grim existed, he mentioned. It's the same for members from the other branches, too, he added in his report. My guess, he continued, it's likely that the recent attack was carried out by a smaller, Internal group directly under the control of Fleck Turn, he told them. Back at the WA headquarters, the director clenched his left fist in frustration. Just as it seemed like the heroes had the jump on humarise, they turned out to be 2 steps behind them. Director Park, All Might chimed in as he approached, getting his attention. There might be another facility that we don't know about, he inferred. They must have guessed that we were coming and moved the bombs in anticipation, he assumed after a moment. And they thought they could get the drop on us with all of the grim they sent our way, he mentioned. All teams stand by in your respective locations, he instructed through the communication line. We're going to send in more heroes to find Humarise's secret base, he declared as All Might stared at the picture reflected upon the big screen of the command center, narrowing his eyes. Just what kind of man would want to do such horrible things? And why? Elsewhere, the eye-patch-wearing man was hurrying through a forest with a suitcase in his arms, wrapped in a light brown cloth. He was sweating madly, but didn't stop running. He couldn't. I have to deliver this, he told himself. If I don't, the world will be destroyed, he noted inwardly. Othian seemed to be a bright and bustling country, but there were some areas that weren't as nice. Next to the local airport were the city slums. Colorful as they were, they did seem worn down compared to the vibrancy of the other areas. There were even trailer homes in the area. Inside one was a young man with spiky brown hair, gray eyes and sun-kissed skin. He wore a red bandana and a pair of sunglasses on his head. He also wore a pale blue, button-up shirt with a number of patches. Along with that, bore a pair of black pants that stopped above his ankles with patches on the knees. He had a pair of dark brown shoes with gray cloth wrapped around them. Standing in front of a mirror, he was getting ready for the day. Roro, Lala, he called out. It's about time for me to head off to work, he noted. You know what to do, he said as he turned his head. Standing behind him were 2 children. One was a boy with dark brown hair, dressed in a white and turquoise shirt that had a few patches, along with a pair of cargo shorts and sandals. The other was a little girl with lighter brown hair tied up in a sideways ponytail thanks to a flower-shaped beret. She wore an orange dress decorated with flowers as well. We'll study bunches, they promised, handing their older brother a red and blue striped tie. He set it on after a moment, grinning all the while. And if it turns out I'm not going to be home till late, he inferred to his siblings. We'll make dinner for ourselves, they declared in response with big smiles, handing him a tan beige jacket with an orange flower in the pocket. He hummed curiously, fitting his arms through the sleeves and setting on a pair of gray gloves. Okay, but, he continued, taking on a teasing grin. What if a weirdo shows up and tries to stalk you, huh? He inquired as he chased after the 2 kids playfully into the living room of their trailer home. We'll pretend that nobody's home, they decided as a reply, taking on determined poses. Yeah, their brother yelled. Yeah, Roro and Lala responded. Don't worry though, the young man assured as he opened the door and headed outside. I doubt today's gig is going to take that long anyway, he affirmed to his siblings. Okay, they exclaimed in reply. Just then, there was a chirping sound. The 2 children looked to see a small, bird-like creature with pink feathers, having a blue mask similar to the brother's bandana flying over to them. She had a puffy, round tail and 3 curved feathers atop her head. Pino, Lala squeaked happily. The small bird gave quick little pecks to the cheeks of both children, making them smile before she went back over the young man, perching herself onto his right shoulder. All right, I'll catch you kiddos later, he called out in farewell, hurrying off. Have a good day, his siblings yelled, waving goodbye. Jogging through the slums, the young man hummed a tune to himself as he wandered down an alleyway. Overhead, he heard a plane soar by, enticing him to look up and see it glide over him, heading toward the nearby runway. He gave off an apathetic look, continuing onward. Maybe once that sight would have spurred some strong feelings. But now, he just didn't care. He had other things to worry about. That was who he was as Rhodey's soul. A few minutes later, he arrived at a small building with Stanlike's bar painted upon it in red. He entered through the door, seeing a middle-aged, chubby man cleaning a glass behind the bar counter. He had brown, puffy hair around his balding head and hairy arms. "Old man, you got a lead for me?" Rhodey questioned in greeting, getting his attention. He huffed disdainfully, seemingly not willing to provide the young man with any information. He approached the counter and set down a couple euro bills, which the bartender quickly snatched as he turned away. "Pickups on East 3rd Street," he told the brunette-haired teen, who leaned back against the counter and listened. "Be quick about it," he advised seriously. "The package needs to be delivered to the Chinese restaurant in South Grove," he mentioned. "How much cash are we talking?" Rhodey inquired curiously. "Huh." The bartender huffed out with a grin after cleaning his glass. "Like you're in a position to negotiate fees," he pointed out disdainfully. "You'll take the regular rate and do it with a smile," he said before moving on to dry off some of the other glasses in front of him. Pino then popped out from the young man's head onto the countertop, chirping angrily. But he took hold of her, muffling her chirps. "Okay, I'm on it," he declared. "Done before you know it," he remarked as a promise. Though as he left the bar moments, he did seem relatively annoyed. And then he noticed the bike locked to a telephone right next to him. It didn't even take him a minute to unlock it and ride away, clinging its bell playfully as he rode past the bar. The bartender took notice from inside, bursting the windows open. "Why you? That's my bike," he yelled out angrily. "You stole it from someone else," Rhodey noted back as a retort. "I'll give it back to its rightful owner later," he decided. Pino flew out beside him, chirping contently at her owner's hijinks. "You can't just take whatever you want, damn punk," the bartender bellowed, seeing the young man pedal away around a corner. "Come on," he beckoned to his bird, who perched herself onto one of the handlebars of the bike. "Let's get this over with," he insisted. Pino chirped happily, ready for whatever the day would bring them. The upper echelon of the city was definitely a vibrant metropolis, with trams and cars driving about as people walked along the streets. "Whoa," Izuku uttered, dressed in his regular costume as he was carrying bags of groceries. "The streets are so busy," he noted aloud. "Yeah, well, I guess it is the biggest city in Othian," Shoto pointed out beside him, also dressed in his regular costume and carrying grocery bags as well. "Still, it's pretty cool," Rhea said, walking ahead of them in her regular hero costume with her visor glasses up over her head, as she also had groceries. "Visiting European countries is probably a once-in-a-million opportunity," she mentioned. "Huh," she happily sighed. "I wish we could visit Paris one day," she admitted with a cute blush upon her cheeks. "That sounds nice," the half-cold, half-hot quirk user noted with a little smile. "And you'd probably want to go with Rachel, right?" Izuku assumed, causing the equestrian magic user to sheepishly giggle. "Am I really that obvious?" she inquired back. "And besides, you could have a romantic getaway with Natalie there one day," she pointed out. A bright red blush broke out on the freckled teen's face. "Okay, you got me there," he admitted sheepishly. "By the way, Midoriya," Shoto began, getting their attentions. "You still haven't told me what Bakugo meant when he said you banged Natalie," he pointed out, causing both him and Rhea to flinch in shock. "Did you hurt her?" he questioned. "And no," Izuku stammered out immediately. "I'd never hurt Natalie," he promised as he shook his head. "Then what happened with you two?" the half-cold, half-hot quirk user inquired out of concern. Well, the one-for-all inheritor stuttered, trembling a little with embarrassment as his face went red. Rhea sighed. "Leave it to Shoto to be a little dense," she noted inwardly before looking ahead and glancing in annoyance over at the back of Katsuki, who was also dressed in his normal hero costume and was carrying grocery bags. "And leave it to Katsuki to speak without tact," she muttered additionally to herself as a drop of sweat rolled down the side of her head. "Ugh," the explosion quirk user groaned out in frustration. Being told to wait on standby is one thing, he grumbled. Since when do I get treated like an errand boy? He roared in question, making Rhea and Izuku flinch in surprise. It's because we're the lowest ranking members in our group, Shoto blankly answered. Huh? Katsuki exclaimed with rage, whipping his head around to him. Calm down, would you? Rhea pleaded, not wanting for the explosion quirk user to make a scene. The only reason we got called up in the first place is because we're doing our work studies at Endeavor's agency, Shoto explained to his classmates. We're basically freebies that were thrown in, he added. And even though we're technically Omni Force members, we're still under Endeavor's jurisdiction when it comes to doing anything, the equestrian magic user mentioned. Still, Izuku uttered. We have a huge responsibility here, he pointed out. Our job is to protect the world from humarise, he stated firmly. And we will find them, Shoto affirmed. We'll make sure of it, he added in declaration. Yeah, Rhea agreed. The stupid organization's full of obsessed idiots, Katsuki muttered out. Why do they believe the quirk doomsday theory? He wondered aloud. They're taking a totally hypothetical idea and using it to justify their crimes, he noted in frustration. It seems like there are lots of bad guys who want to justify what they do, the equestrian magic user noted. Kinda like those other cultists you fought with Natalie and the Fire Force, she mentioned. Oh yeah, the white-clad, Izuku recalled. That reminds me, isn't Natalie technically low-ranked like us? Shoto assumed, getting his attention. Well, I think since she's doing her work study with the Fire Force, who were asked to come from another universe, the one for all inheritor started explaining in reply. She's got more of a leg up on us, he said. That makes sense, the half-cold, half-hot quirk user said, while Katsuki was seething with frustration ahead of them. Aside from just humarise, the Grimm are a huge problem, Rhea pointed out. It's no wonder the World Heroes Association wants to send in more backup for all 25 locations we're in, she added with narrowed eyes. Hasn't Team Ruby dealt with Grimm and their master before? Shoto inquired. Well, actually, Izuku's comment was interrupted as he accidentally tripped, about to fall over. He was lucky to catch himself by planting his right foot forward. Unfortunately, it seemed like one of his grocery bags wasn't going to be that lucky. But without warning, a pair of hands managed to grab it before it, or its contents could hit the ground. The one for all inheritor, and the others looked to see Blake there, standing up with the bag in hand. What we did to stop Salem back in the day was a little more complicated than you might think, she noted, walking over and handing the grocery bag back to Izuku. And it wasn't just us, she mentioned. Thanks, Miss Belladonna, the freckled teen said with gratitude as he sighed with relief. What are you even doing here? Katsuki questioned as he approached. Figured I'd get out and about while we're still waiting on new orders, the cat faunus answered. And besides, she continued, putting her hands onto her hips. I wanted to get to know you a little better, she confessed. Get to know us? Rhea repeated in confusion. Well, I guess that's half true, Blake admitted sheepishly as she scratched at her right cheek. I know Katsuki and Shoto from the supplement classes they took, along with that final, she recalled. Tusk, the explosion quirk user scoffed as he glanced away, while his red and white-haired classmate smiled. And I know Rhea most since I visit her and her brother from time to time, the cat faunus mentioned, causing the equestrian magic user to blush and turn her head to the side in embarrassment. So, she continued, looking over to Izuku. I guess that leaves me learning more about you, she assumed. Oh. The one for all inheritor stammered out with a little blush on his cheeks. I'm honored to. Just then, the sound of a blast erupted as smoke billowed out from a building ahead of the group. They all perked up, looking over to see two men running out from the smoky building. One had a pink afro, while the other had a yellow pompadour. In the latter's hand was a suitcase. Those thieves robbed my jewelry shop, a man yelled as he came out from the smoke. Somebody stop them, he pleaded. As if on cue, Izuku, Katsuki, Rhea and Shoto launched forward after the two men. Blake was surprised at just how quickly they reacted. But she also that this wasn't something they needed to be involved in. "Oh great," she muttered out, hurrying after them. "Ah, hell, heroes." The afro-haired thief yelled upon spotting the four teenagers coming after them. "Catch up with you at the spot," his partner promised as made his entire body aside from his head rotate like a vortex, propelling himself forward down the street. "I'll leave the case to you," the afro-haired villain declared, grabbing two tufts of hair from his head before blasting himself down toward an alleyway with sparkles coming from each explosion. "They split," Rhea exclaimed before putting her visor goggles over her eyes and ponying up in a flash of light, flying toward and turning into the alleyway, soaring up the stairs. "You chased the other one," Katsuki yelled to Izuku and Shoto, blasting himself after his winged classmate. "Got it." The one-for-all inheritor responded as he and half-cold, half-hot quirk user continued their pursuit of the pompadour-haired man. He was heading down a very busy street that was packed with people. "Move, move," he yelled repeatedly, charging through the crowd and sending people high into the air. "Get out of my way now," he shouted, uncaringly continuing onward. Those he had knocked into the air screamed, about to fall to their deaths. "Black Whip," Izuku yelled as he jumped up and unleashed several dark energy tendrils from the orange sights of his gloves, wrapping around and catching the falling bystanders. A little boy and girl unfortunately missed his grasp, but Blake rushed in and jumped up to catch them, landing down and skidding to a stop. "Call the police," she called out to the crowd as she set the children down. "Let them know there's been a robbery," she advised. In the meantime, Shoto used an ice wave to surf along the buildings after the perpetrator, avoiding anyone else. Elsewhere, the afro-haired villain continued to blast himself along as Rhea and Katsuki were still in pursuit of him. The former then flew upward, allowing her colleague to continue the chase around a corner as he planted his foot against the side of a house before blasting after the thief. He took notice and grabbed more tufts of his hair, flinging them out toward the explosion quirk user. They burst in a sparkling blast, seemingly enveloping him in gray smoke. At the top of the steps the villain had traversed, he smirked. "Ha ha ha," he cackled. "That'll teach ya," he muttered out. "What a pathetic blast," Katsuki yelled to his surprise, only for him to look up and gasp to see the explosion quirk user high above the cloud of smoke, falling toward him. "I'll show you what a real one looks like," he declared as an orange glow came off of his hands. However, he never got the chance to counterattack as Rhea suddenly zipped in and kicked the villain upside the head with her left leg, rendering him unconscious as he fell over the railing on the other side and wound up entangled in a bunch on clotheslines along the way down. A nearby cat hissed in fright at the sudden sight of him. "Phew," the equestrian magic user sighed with relief as she landed down next to the defeated villain, deactivating her magic. "That was at least quick," she noted aloud. "Katsuki, let's—" "You stole my kill, you damn rainbow chick," the explosion quirk user roared in her face as he was right next to her, making her flinch in surprise as she shivered. "Sorry," she stammered out, holding her hands up in a placating manner. Elsewhere in the city, Rhodey was lurking in the corner of an alleyway, leaning against the wall. He impatiently tapped his right foot against the ground. "This is taking too long," he grumbled out. "My contact better not be a no-show," he muttered on. "Ah!" a woman screamed from afar, causing him to blink in surprise. He peeked around the corner, only to find the pompadour-haired thief coming toward him. "Here," he exclaimed, handing off the case to the young man before continuing on his way. "Wait, what?" he uttered in surprise. At that moment, Shoto rushed by upon his ice wave, continuing his pursuit of the pompadour-haired villain. Realizing the situation was out of his control, Rhodey took off down the alley he was in. The half-cold, half-hot quirk user had flames erupt around his right arm, firing them off in a stream toward the fleeing fiend. However, the vortex he was building easily blew them out. Ha ha ha. He laughed as he looked back at his foe, not noticing the wall of ice forming ahead of him. Not gonna work on me, he proclaimed. And then he slammed into the ice wall. Guo, he grunted out, losing consciousness as the vortex around him had vanished. That took longer than expected, Shoto admitted as he approached the villain, who slid down the ice wall. He then realized something, looking around. Todoroki, Izuku called out, getting his attention as he turned to see him and Blake coming over. Midoriya, Miss Belladonna, he said. The case is gone, he pointed out to them. Did he get rid of it? The one for all inheritor assumed as greenish sparks crackled around his body, looking around. All of a sudden, he lightly gasped as he spotted a grinning roadie running down the alley with a case in hand. There's a third, he yelled, running after him. Turn that guy over to the police, Blake advised of Shoto before leaping up from wall to wall as she headed for the rooftops. Izuku and I'll get this guy, she promised. Right, the half-cold, half-hot quirk user replied, taking hold of the unconscious villain and slinging his right arm over his shoulders. In the meantime, his freckled classmate made his way to the end of the alley he was running down, coming to a stop. It was a busy plaza with people and cars bustling about. Spotting anyone in particular would be difficult. But then he heard some car horns go off, seeing that Rhodey was running across a street. Izuku quickly jumped onto a fountain and leapt to the other side of the plaza. He looked around for a few moments again, as he thought the thief was heading down the path. Instead, it turned out he was heading up a fire escape to the roof. Gotcha, the one for all inheritor remarked aloud as he leapt up after him, jumping from platform of the fire escape. Rhodey grimaced upon seeing him close in as he momentarily stopped. But then Pino flew out from his ponytail, diving toward Izuku determinedly. Wah! He yelped before the small bird collided squarely with his face. And then, she promptly let out a toot. Ah! The freckled teen gasped as he paled from the foul stench. He trembled in midair weakly before starting to fall, while the little bird contently flew back and perched herself upon her owner's shoulder as he smirked. Stinks to be you? He remarked with a wink before continuing up the fire escape. The one for all inheritor thankfully landed on the ground upon his feet, stumbling for a few moments before managing to regain himself. He then looked up and spotted Rhodey up on the rooftops, running along. He's already up on the roof? He exclaimed in surprise, hurrying after him with a great leap. He glanced back as Pino was chirping with panic, seeing that the freckled teen was still in pursuit as he leapt from roof to roof. I can't shake him, he realized. But that didn't deter him in the slightest. Instead, he turned and flung the case as if it were a discus, taking a great flip over the edge of the roof to land onto the next one at the other side of the street, somersaulting onto his feet. In the process, he actually caught the case. Black Whip! Izuku yelled from afar as he leapt up and swung his left arm forward, releasing several energy tendrils from the orange sights upon his glove. Rhodey was swift, running away with ease as he flipped over vents and ducked under billboards. He even ran backwards at one point, planting himself on a chair and falling into another somersault before lunging away from the incoming tendrils. Still got it, he remarked as he leapt over to the next building. From afar, Blake was watching as he continued to evade Izuku. Shit, she cursed, drawing her gambo shroud out from its sheath. In the meantime, Rhodey leapt onto the rafters of a complex, skipping across one after another. Hey, knock knock, he yelled as he tapped a window he passed with his right fist. It was then opened by a dog, causing the pursuing one for all inheritor to almost lose his balance, having to grab onto the window to keep himself upright. The chase continued down a telephone pole as the thief weaved around the wires. The freckled teen found himself entangled as he grimaced. A few moments later, Rhodey used the suitcase he had to ride along a clothesline to the other side of a street, knocking off any garments that were on it as he safely fell onto an awning before landing on the sidewalk. The pursuing Izuku took notice as he arrived on the scene, quickly shooting out his black energy tendrils from the sights of his gloves to snatch them before they could fall to the ground. "Oh, thank you so much," a woman called out with gratitude from one of the windows, waving to the one for all inheritor after he returned the clothes to her. He was looking around for a sign of the brunette-haired young man. He couldn't have gotten that far away yet, right? He inquired to himself, hurrying off. "Ha," Rhodey chuckled, sliding down a railing of some steps. "I think it's pretty obvious that I'm too smooth for ya," he pointed out as Pino flew alongside him. "Can't catch someone with these moves," he proclaimed as he flipped onto the next railing over. His bird glanced back and widened her eyes to spot Blake throwing her gambol shroud out to latch onto the railing as she came down. She slid after the pair, who both grimaced upon seeing her. "Great, another one," the thief muttered out, hopping off of the railing and running down the sidewalk. The cat Faunus was quick to leap after him, nimbly using lampposts to flip forward and close the distance. She was ready to throw out her weapon and snatch the case from him. But without warning, she was ambushed by Pino, who flew up and pecked at her head. Hey," she yelped. That moment she lost her concentration. She failed to see where she was heading, ending up crashing into a bed of flowers in front of a florist's shop as bystanders gasped in surprise. "Og," she groaned, spitting out a few petals that wound up in her mouth. She looked ahead to see that Rhodey was grinning as his bird returned to perch herself on his left shoulder. She growled with frustration, sheathing her weapon before shooting up to her feet, continuing the pursuit. Elsewhere in the city, a blue sports car was speeding and swerving past other vehicles on a bridge. Driving was the eye-patched man, who was now dressed in regular clothes. Sitting in the passenger's seat next to him was the wrapped object he had taken with him. As he kept going down the highway with determination in his eye, he glanced at the rearview mirror and spotted something as he lightly gasped. Coming up behind him on a motorcycle was an athletically built woman with short mint green hair and sharp eyes of the same color. She wore a gray sleeveless combat suit, with a mask obscuring the lower part of her face. Strapped to her back was a white quiver carrying arrows. Accompanying her suit were bulky, cream-colored boots, and a green hooded cape with a red arrow fletching pinned to the left side of the hood. On her right hand was a burgundy red glove, and on her left the index finger was wrapped in the same material. All of a sudden, a projectile shot in through the back windshield from her and slashed off the man's eye patch, also leaving a cut in his cheek. He swerved his car for a moment, struggling to regain control. The woman in pursuit closed in. She extended her left thumb and pinky out, making them glow in a greenish light before they shaped into the two ends of an archery bow, with a green glowing line acting as the string upon them. She pulled out a trio of arrows, setting them onto the nocking point and pulling them back. They were shot in green streaks of light, piercing through the man's car. One popped his back left tire entirely, causing him to swerve out of control as sparks flew about. The car struck the guardrail, rolling along the street toward the other end of the bridge. Down below, Rhodey was passing by along a crosswalk until he overheard the commotion. He glanced up to see a part of the bridge shatter apart, with its pieces falling toward him. Whoa, he stammered, frantically moving to avoid getting crushed by the debris. Yikes, he exclaimed as he dove forward, dropping the case in the process. The billowing smoke from the scene could be seen for miles. Izuku landed upon a small brick wall of fart and noticed. "An accident?" he exclaimed in shock. "Midoriya," Shoto called out, getting his attention as he glanced to see the half-cold, half-hot user run by. "I'll take care of the car crash," he decided. "You and Miss Belladonna find the thief," he advised. "Got it, thanks," Izuku replied with gratitude, letting green sparks crackle around him as he leapt off to continue his pursuit. Meanwhile, Blake was nearing the scene of the accident, spotting the dust cloud veiling where debris had fallen. Inside, Rhodey had gone down to his stomach, bracing his head with his gloved hands. Pino flew out from his jacket and started chirping to get his attention. He perked up and saw that the debris hadn't hit them. Hey, we're okay, he realized with relief. But then he noticed that the case was missing. Huh, he yelped, shooting to his feet and looking around for it. Fortunately, he found it just lying off to the side. Huh, he sighed, going over to pick it up off of the brown cloth it was upon. Dang, we're gonna be late, he muttered while jogging onward. He glanced back to see not only Blake running after him, but also Izuku lunging toward him. Whoa, he exclaimed, hurrying down the stairs into the subway tunnel. Wait, the freckled teen yelled, landing down and joining the cat Faunus as they continued their pursuit. Back on the bridge, the archer woman had been watching as the flames billowed behind her from the wreckage. She drove off on her motorcycle a moment later. Hold the door, will ya? Rhodey yelled as he scurried into the last train car before it took off. Inside, he fell to his hands and knees as he tried to catch his breath. Pino lied right beside him, also exhausted. Heck of a day, huh? He noted aloud as he stood up and grabbed the case. Oh, geez, he muttered out, looking himself over. This is my best set of clothes, and now look, they're all scuffed up, he grumbled, while his bird perched herself onto his right shoulder. Those stupid heroes. I should send them a dry cleaning bill, he remarked. He failed to notice that Izuku was in hot pursuit of the train, catching up to it. The conductor was panicking, wondering what in the world he was even trying to do. The brunette-haired young man seemed blissfully unaware. Wait, have we seen either of them before? He asked of Pino. Is this town even in their jurisdiction? He inquired on. His bird tilted her head to the side, unsure herself. Oh well, her owner sighed with a shrug of his shoulders, failing still to spot the freckled teen getting closer. Don't have to worry about them now, huh? He assumed. And at that moment, Izuku pressed himself against the train as if he were a frog. Ah, the conductor shrieked girlishly, seeing the fish-like expression of his face pressed against the glass. Rhodey and Pino looked back to notice the one-for-all inheritor. They simultaneously screamed as their eyes bugged out. Clearly, they didn't expect such resilience from him. A few moments later, Blake arrived at the station to find that Izuku already had Rhodey seemingly cornered. He was leaning against the railing with his gloved right hand over his mouth, taking notice of the cat Faunus jumping onto the platform. Any update from Todoroki on the accident? The one-for-all inheritor asked of her as she approached. She shook her head. We can worry about that later, she affirmed to him, turning her attention onto the brunette-haired young man. Right now, she continued, narrowing her eyes onto him. Why exactly did you two chase me down? He asked, turning his head away from her. Why were you running from us? Izuku questioned back. I have work to do, so I was in a hurry, Rhodey argued as a response. What kind of work? Blake asked curiously, crossing her arms over her chest and raising an eyebrow. I move money, know what I mean? He told her with a grin. May not look it, but I'm a skilled negotiator, he pointed out as he adjusted his coat. So, will you please let me get along with my business, okay? He requested of the pair as he started to trot off. Thanks, he said. So show us what's in the case, and then you're free to go, Izuku decided, causing him to stop. How much are you offering me? He inquired curiously. Huh? The freckled teen uttered in confusion. You ask for something. It's only natural you should pay for it, Rhodey noted as a response. What? Blake said as she blinked. Wait, that isn't even the issue here, she pointed out. We just want to make sure it's not stolen goods, Izuku stated as he stepped forward to approach him. There was a robbery just a little while ago and… Say, you're not heroes from this country, are you? Rhodey guessed as he turned to face the pair, interrupting the one-for-all inheritor as he flinched in surprise. The brunette-haired young man chuckled. Is it really okay for you to do hero work in a foreign land if you don't have permission? He inquired on. Well, the thing is, the freckled teen tried to say, unsure of how to phrase things as he lowered his gaze. You've got no authority in this city, so maybe rethink your tone, my friends, the brunette-haired young man advised as he approached Izuku, sticking a finger tauntingly in his face to make him back up. Or should I tell the police that I was chased and harassed by some power-hungry heroes who had no legal right to detain me? He suggested of them. How do you think that's going to go over, buddy? He asked of the one-for-all inheritor with a taunting grin, wiggling his finger in his face. Erg, he growled out. Oh, for the love of, Blake grumbled out, reaching back to pull out her gambol shroud. I'm so glad we could come to this understanding, Rhodey noted after a chuckle, patting Izuku on his shoulder. If you want to do pro work, I suggest you stay in your own country from now on, he insisted with a wink as he pointed to his former pursuant. Later, he said in farewell, ready to leave as turned around. I don't think so, the cat faunus remarked, causing him to perk up and gasp to see her in front of him with her weapon in its pistol form, aimed at him. He yelped loudly. What the hell are you doing? He stammered in question. Miss Belladonna? Izuku stuttered out of shock. Let's put things into perspective, okay? Blake requested. You were running from the scene of a crime. You're carrying a case that looks exactly like the one that was taken from the jewelry store that was robbed. She listed off, causing Rhodey to grimace from each point. And instead of complying with us, you're trying to swindle money in order to show us what's in the case, she finished, narrowing her eyes. You might be able to bluff, but I know people who bluff better, she quipped. So, she continued as she kept Gambol shroud aimed on him. Do we hand you over to the police? She offered. Or do you want to show us what's in the case and prove you're not a crook? She inquired on. The brunette-haired young man was sweating bullets. He had no idea how to counter her points. Then again, he did have the edge of knowing that neither her nor Izuku were from Othian, meaning they didn't have jurisdiction. And nice try, he stammered out. But I'll let the police know just what you two did, he affirmed, turning around and starting to walk away. Hey, Blake shouted. At that moment, Izuku shot forward. Wait, he yelled, grabbing Rhodey by his left arm to stop him. There was a long moment of silence. What's your problem? The brunette-haired young man growled in question. I told you, we want to see what's in the case. The one-for-all inheritor answered simply. If you want to see, then flash some cash, Rhodey insisted back. Show us, and maybe I will, Izuku retorted, trying to call his bluff. TCH, he scoffed out. Show me 100,000 euros, he demanded. You're out of your mind, the freckled teen responded with a glare. Just let go of me, Rhodey yelled, trying to pry himself free from Izuku's grasp, only for him to pull him back. The two of them then started to wrestle over the case, snatching it from each other. They then both got their hands on the handle, tugging as hard as they could. Hands off, the brunette-haired young man shouted, clenching his teeth together. Hey, cut it out, Blake yelled, about get between the two. But all of a sudden, Pino flew out and slammed right into her face as she yelped. Ultimately, the tug of war between Izuku and Rhodey ended with the case flying out of their hands as they fell over, while it clattered along the platform. The two boys quickly scrambled over to it, trying to push each other aside in the process. But once they made their way over, they found that the case was opened, with only notebooks and paperwork inside. Awkwardly, the freckled teen turned to the young man next to him, as he was just as flabbergasted. I'm confused, he admitted sheepishly, unsure of what to make of this discovery. And little did he realize that there was more to the case than met the eyes. Back on the bridge, the wrecked car at the scene of the accident had been iced over by Shoto in order to snuff out the flames. The man inside had already been taken to a hospital for treatment as police were investigating the scene. In the meantime, the half-cold, half-hot quirk user had just given his report on the situation to an officer. Good work, he complimented to the UA student. Hey, come over here for a sec, one of the forensic experts by the car called out. getting Shoto's attention as he approached. "Take a look at these," he said, pointing toward the holes punctured through the car's metal frame, being present in many different areas. "Where'd they come from?" Another one of the forensic experts wondered aloud. Meanwhile, the half-cold, half-hot quirk user narrowed his eyes. Was this an attack? He guessed inwardly. "Shoto!" a voice called out, causing him to perk up as he turned to see Weiss flying over aboard a Nevermore summon, hopping off of it to land in front of him as it dissipated into white ashes. "I take it you got here as soon as you could, right?" she assumed. "Yeah," he replied. "The driver was already taken to the hospital," he mentioned. "Huh," the ex-heiress sighed. "Anyways, your dad sent me to bring you back to the hotel," she pointed out. "He's not exactly happy that you took off," she added, placing her hands onto her hips. "Where are Bakugo and Tennyson?" Shoto inquired. "Yong's got them," Weiss answered. "So where are Izuku and Blake?" she asked back. Not too far from the scene of the accident, the Archer woman was opening the case she had obtained upon a trash can in an alleyway. However, she was surprised to find the colorful jewels that were inside. She clenched her fists in frustration, kicking it aside as the jewels scattered about the ground. Moments later, she was in contact with Flecht. He narrowed his eyes in disappointment. "Unfortunate," he said. "But so be it," he remarked. "We'll take the necessary precautions," he told his subordinate as he was speaking to her via a video call in the foyer of Humarise's base. "You shall continue tracking it down," he instructed. "Of course," she replied over the communication. "Thank you, sir," she said with gratitude. "Don't forget, Burroughs," Flecht advised from her phone. "There is only one way for those possessed by the demon of sickness to atone," he noted. "And that is to give oneself to the cause of saving humanity," he stated firmly. The Archer woman closed her eyes and put her left hand over her heart. "I understand," she assured. Back in the subway, a minute had passed since the contents of the suitcase had been revealed to Izuku and Blake. The situation was already weird enough now that the pair had realized that Rhodey seemingly wasn't the thief they thought he was. But to make matters even more weird, "I'm sorry," Izuku emphatically apologized, being on his hands and knees, and he profusely bowed his head. "Please forgive me, I beg of you," he pleaded to the brunette-haired young man, who was shocked. "Geez. So much for avoiding making some kind of scene," he noted inwardly, cringing as he could tell that people on the platform were staring. "I'm sorry, too," Blake apologized as she sheepishly scratched at her right cheek, putting her gambol shroud away. "But you have to admit, you running didn't exactly help your case," she pointed out. Pino chirped angrily at her, causing her to flinch. "Hey, it's no biggie," Rhodey assured in reply. "I'm just glad that you two don't think I'm a criminal anymore," he noted as he rubbed his gloved hands. "We're good here," he assured, crouching down to gather the contents of the case and close it afterward. "I guess even heroes make mistakes and chase after innocent people on occasion," he assumed, standing up. "So, what exactly is all that stuff now that we've seen it?" the cat Faunus asked of him. Just some paperwork stuff for one of my clients," he answered as Pino tucked herself into the collar of his jacket. "Gotta get it over to him before he gets pissed," he pointed out with a chuckle. Though inwardly, he was panicking. "Oh crap, what's going on?" he wondered as he turned away. "This isn't what I signed up for," he yelled through his thoughts, shaking the case as he clenched his teeth angrily. "Wasn't this supposed to be full of jewelry?" he questioned, checking each and every angle of the object to see if there was something inside of it. Are you okay?" Blake asked in concern. Rhodey was tuning her out, trying to retrace his steps. He got the case from the thieves, was heading toward the train station, and then, he uttered out. "No, don't tell me," he started to realize, remembering when he had to evade the falling debris from the bridge earlier and wound up dropping the case. He thought he had picked it up, but instead, "I mixed up the cases," he concluded in panic. Izuku and Blake watched him tremble as sweat poured down his face. Anyway, he uttered as he turned to them shakily and waved. Like I said, super busy, he pointed out. You're really sweaty, the freckled teen noted, seeing him head off. Do you feel okay? He asked out of concern. Aw, hey, Blake called out as he passed by her. Nothing else was on his mind other than how badly he had screwed up. Shoot. I need to hurry up and backtrack, he advised to himself. But will the case still be there? He inquired through his thoughts as he passed by the turnstiles. If someone picked it up and looked at what was inside, there's no way I'm getting it back, he noted while going up the stairs. We're dealing with villains here. He pointed out inwardly. I can't say oopsie, I lost it, he inferred, grimacing all the while from how much trouble he had gotten himself into. This is bad, he realized as he walked up into the plaza, still sweating. What am I gonna do? He wondered. Excuse me, Izuku's voice suddenly chimed in, causing him to shiver in surprise as his sunglasses fell over his eyes. He turned his head to see the freckled teen and Blake approaching him. Are you positive that nothing's wrong with you? The former of the two asked with concern. Oh, I'm peaky, thanks, Rhodey quickly responded as he pushed his sunglasses back up over his bandana. Okay then, Izuku said. The cat Faunus then put a hand onto his shoulder and sighed. Well, we should probably head back to the hotel, she advised. I bet the others are starting to worry about us, she pointed out in inference. Yeah, the one for all inheritor agreed. All of a sudden, they heard police sirens roar as cars and SWAT trucks zipped into the plaza, all gathering near where Rhodey was. He paled. The police? Already? He exclaimed inwardly as beads of sweat continued rolling down his face. How'd they know what happened? He wondered through his thoughts. Several riot cops and officers disembarked from their vehicles, aiming their weapons at the brunette-haired young man. Hands up and kneel on the ground, one of them demanded of him. He stumbled back a few steps, falling onto his posterior. Hey guys, he uttered out, evidently frightened as he shut his eyes. Please just hold on, Izuku pleaded to the law enforcement as he held his hands out to them. It's not him, he assured. And this is a little overkill for just one person, Blake mentioned as she stood alongside him. Truth, Rhodey suddenly exclaimed as he scampered to his feet and took off. Didn't steal anything, he proclaimed, running away. Hey, wait, the cat Faunus yelled. Stop him, one officer shouted out. We have permission to shoot, another declared. Fire, he commanded. With that, a flurry of shots rained out from the officers' guns. Wah! Rhodey screamed as he could hear bullets race by him. Suddenly, he was picked up by Izuku, who leapt into the air with him. Hang on, and try not to flail, he insisted of the brunette-haired young man, unleashing black energy tendrils from the sights of his gloves. Back in the plaza, Blake whipped around to the police with a shocked and angered expression upon her face. What the hell are you? She didn't even get the chance to finish her question as she saw that the officers were starting to shoot at her. She quickly formed a clone to take the bullets in her stead as she propelled herself backwards, drawing her gambol shroud and flinging it out to latch onto a balcony railing. She swung herself across the balcony, following Izuku as he was using his energy tendrils to swing himself through the streets. Iamada! Rhodey screamed as he was being carried along. Izuku, Blake called out, getting his attention. They just shot at me, too, she noted to him. What? He exclaimed in shock with widened eyes. They glanced back, seeing police cars in pursuit of them as their sirens wailed. They headed down into an alleyway, with the freckled teen accidentally tearing through a truck's cover before shooting off down the path. Many bystanders were befuddled by him and the cat Faunus racing by, but yelped as they saw police cars zip in, lunging off to the side to avoid getting hit. The trio saw that they were relentlessly pursuing them, not caring in the slightest about the damages they were causing. Tesk, Blake scoffed, reclaiming her gambol shroud and setting it into its pistol form. Sorry about this, she apologized in advance, firing off a few shots. The bullets popped the front tires of the leading car, causing it to swerve out of control before it crashed into a newsstand. The other cars had to screech to a halt, piling up over each other as the leading one was blocking their path. "Miss Belladonna, hold on," Izuku called out, having a few of his energy tendrils shoot out toward her and wrap around her waist to help carry her along. As Rhodey continued screaming in horror and confusion, the freckled teen arrived at the end of the alleyway, taking a great leap. He was descending toward the city below, shooting a pair of his energy tendrils to latch onto the train riding along the bridge ahead. He reeled himself in, landing upon it in a flurry of dust. It quickly cleared, revealing him and the others crouched around the case atop the train. They took a few deep breaths of exhaustion, having been moving for a while. "Why would they be using lethal force on us?" the One for All inheritor questioned. "I've got no idea," Blake responded as she put a hand onto the case to keep it from getting blown off. She looked over to Rhodey, who looked extremely blue in the face as his lips were dried. "I thought that I was gonna die," he whimpered out as Pino stuck out from his hair, having almost the exact same expression. "Huh," the cat faunus exhaled. "At any rate, let's calm down and get in touch with the others," she advised, reaching into her coat for something. "We'll take him with us and make sure everyone knows what happened," she affirmed. "Right, good call," Izuku agreed with a nod. Things did seem calm for the moment. But unbeknownst to them, the danger wasn't even close to over. All of a sudden, Izuku felt a change in the wind, whipping around and spotting an arrow coming his way. He had the outer layer of his right glove jolt forward, flicking his middle finger to unleash a pressurized blast of air to knock the projectile away. However, it veered back around in a green streak of light, heading toward him again. Blake leapt in and swatted it aside with her cleaver, drawing her Gambol Shroud's katana from the sheath. "Hurry, go," she yelled, hopping back to avoid the arrow from landing on its third attempt as it pierced through the roof of the train car, becoming stuck. "Someone else is after us," Izuku noted through his thoughts out of shock, picking up Rhodey in his arms just as he had grabbed the case. He looked into the distance and noticed a glimpse of reflective light from atop a hill. Upon it was Burroughs, who prepped another arrow on her longbow's string as its fletching glowed a bright green. She fired, letting the arrow fly toward the train as it was traveling through the suspension bridge. The One for All inheritor and the cat faunus were quick to take action, quickly hurrying over the train cars and evading the arrow. Rhodey regained some semblance of consciousness as he saw that they weren't out of the woods yet. The archer villain atop the hill readied another trio of arrows, knocking them back and launching them. "Mama!" The brunette-haired young man screamed with tears flying out from his eyes as the arrows flew by, shattering the car windows as people inside murmured with shock. Izuku took notice. "We can't put bystanders in danger," he realized, swinging himself along to the end of the train. "What's happening?" Rhodey shrieked in question, unable to comprehend the sheer craziness of what he had just gotten himself involved in. He continued screaming as Izuku pulled them up toward the top of the bridge, flipping around to avoid the incoming arrows. Blake came up as well, firing off shots from her Gambol Shroud in its pistol form to knock away a few of the arrows that would have hit the freckled teen, creating shadow clones to propel herself after him. He kept expelling black tendrils to swing around second by second, all while the young man he carried was yelling for his life. And all of a sudden, he suddenly passed out from all the adrenaline as his eyes went white. With that, Izuku's hold on him suddenly loosened as he started to plummet down toward the pavement below. "No!" the freckled teen yelled, having to flip and dodge the arrows still heading his way. It didn't seem like he'd be able to catch Rhodey. But thankfully, Blake swung in and grabbed him in her left arm, also catching the case. "Izuku," she called out. After blasting the arrows back with more pressurized air blasts shot from his gloves as he flicked his fingers, the One for All inheritor dove toward the cat faunus. expelling more black tendrils to attach to the bridge's cables. He swung by and caught both her and Rhodey. Meanwhile, the police had arrived on the bridge as several cars were still in pursuit. Izuku and Blake continued to hurry along the bridge as they swung, with the former carrying the brunette-haired young man, while the latter was holding onto the case. "We have to get somewhere safe," the freckled teen realized, letting his black whips dissipate before diving toward the water below. He entered with a splash, while the huntress followed suit. Back on the hill, Burroughs scoffed in frustration, letting her fingers morph back to normal as she went over to her motorcycle. She kicked back the kickstand and drove off, knowing that her mission wasn't yet over. Idiots. Enji yelled from the standby hotel. He and the others had taken residence for the time being. Weiss and Yang had just returned with Katsuki, Rhea, and Shoto, having informed the Flame Hero about what had taken place earlier. "We're right in the middle of an important mission," he pointed out angrily as they were in the lobby area. "You should leave the petty criminals for the local authorities to take care of," he advised of his work-study students. "We're sorry." The equestrian magic user apologized with a stutter as she bowed her head profusely. "We just saw what happened and reacted," she noted sheepishly as she looked away. "I thought heroes were supposed to assist those in trouble," Shoto argued. "You're the one who's supposed to be teaching us," Katsuki pointed out as he leaned up against a pillar. "Maybe you should have explained how to ignore crime," he suggested uncaringly. "That's not what I said," Enji shouted back through a growl. "Tusk," the explosion quirk user scoffed. Without warning, though, he received a prompt smack to the back of his head. "What the hell?" he yelled, looking back to see Raven there. "Quit being a little pissant," she insisted firmly. "What you kids could have done was make sure nobody got hurt while calling the police or local heroes," she pointed out. "What if any of you got really hurt and we didn't know?" she inquired rhetorically of the UA students. Rhea and Shoto lowered their heads in contemplation, while Katsuki scoffed again. "Huh," Enji sighed. "Thank you, Raven," he said in gratitude. "You two sure do give off that mom and dad energy for this little group," Yang cheekily joked as she slid up next to her biological mother. She blinked in surprise, blushing a bright red. "Why, Yang," she stammered out as her daughter giggled. "Anyway, I assume there's a reason Deku's not here?" The Flame Hero guessed, looking toward his son for an answer as he ignored the nearby banter. "He's following someone who was working with the jewel thieves," he explained in reply, pulling out his phone from his pocket. "But he's not picking up his phone right now," he pointed out in concern. "You slackers," Enji roared out, swinging his arms down. "I shouldn't have brought you with me, even if you are doing your work studies," he noted angrily as the fire around him flared wildly. "Blake was with them, too," Weiss mentioned as she approached. "She was going after the same thief Izuku was, right?" she guessed, earning a nod in reply from Shoto. "In that case, I guess she technically gave them the go-ahead to stop those guys," Yang concluded. "That still doesn't make it right," Raven pointed out seriously with crossed arms. "So Deku still isn't back yet?" Natalie's voice chimed in as she jogged over alongside Maki. "No, not yet," Rhea responded as she shook her head. "Shoto, can you try him one more time?" she requested. "I'll call by MPG if he doesn't pick." At that moment, the ringer of the half-cold, half-hot quirk user's phone went off. He looked to see who was calling. "It's him," he said, seeing Izuku's name on the screen. He tapped the answer icon before putting the phone to his left ear. "Midoriya, hey," he greeted. "Do you have the suspect?" he inquired. "The police just attacked us out of nowhere," the freckled teen exclaimed over the line, causing Shoto to lightly gasp in surprise. "What? Why? What did you do to them?" he asked quickly, causing everyone around to perk up in worry. "I don't know," Izuku responded. In the meantime, Yang felt a buzz in her pocket before she reached in and grabbed her MPG, seeing its green glow. She pressed its center icon before a hologram of Blake appeared above her device. "Yang," she exclaimed. Blake, what's going on? Young immediately asked. Are you and Deku okay? She questioned on. Yeah, for the most part. The cat faunus responded. Did Izuku already tell you about what happened with the police? She inquired. No, why? Her blonde-haired friend asked back, arching an eyebrow. He just said that the police attacked them for no reason. Shoto chimed in as a response. What? Natalie exclaimed out of shock. Midoriya, can you elaborate? Shoto requested, hitting the speaker icon on his phone. Izuku and Blake had found themselves at the end of a riverbank on their respective devices, while Rhodey was lying on the ground and spitting up water as he tried to catch his breath. The police barely said anything at all before they started firing at us. The one-for-all inheritor explained to the half-cold, half-hot quirk user and the others. And when we tried to run away, we were attacked again by someone else who looked like a villain, he mentioned. What about the thief you and Miss B were chasing? Natalie asked over the line. Did you catch him? She inquired on. Hold on, Natalie, Shoto advised. Let him calm down and explain from the beginning, he insisted. Okay, so, Izuku began as he stood up and wandered into the shrubbery for a moment. Miss Belladonna and I chased the guy who ran away with the case and eventually caught him, he told his colleagues. But there wasn't any jewelry inside when we opened it up, he pointed out over the line. And then when the police showed up in full force, they started firing on him and us, Blake mentioned from Young's MPG. We're laying low for right now, but we need to find out what's going on, she added seriously. Weiss hummed out curiously. Thinking of something, Princess? Raven guessed. I wonder, could there have been a switch of the cases somehow? The ex-heiress wondered as she glanced up and thought. By accident maybe, she suggested. Look, just MPG over here pronto with Deku and the other guy, Young advised of the cat faunus. We'll deal with whatever the cops are after together, she promised. Just then, the doors slammed open, getting their attentions as they saw Ruby and Claire there. Endeavor, emergency, the latter of the two called out. It's about Deku and Blake, the former mentioned grimly. What? Rhea uttered in confusion. Moments later, the group ventured into the briefing room to find out what was going on. They joined the other heroes, Kiro and Takisa, in watching a local news broadcast. Once again, according to recent police reports, the anchor on the screen said as images of Izuku and Blake were up on the screen. The suspects who were thought to have killed 12 people are at large and considered highly dangerous, he told viewers. One is a Japanese hero, called Deku, he stuttered out. Real name Izuku Midoriya, he mentioned. The other is a Caucasian, dark-haired female with cat-like features named Blake Belladonna, he said. The entire nation is on the lookout for them, he noted as everyone in the room widened their eyes in shock. There are other reports that they have an accomplice with them, he added. Hello? Izuku's voice rang out from Shoto's phone, which had been taken off speaker. Hello, Todoroki? He called out again. Young, what's going on? Blake asked from her teammate's MPG. Everyone was left speechless. And the turmoil that was bound to follow would only be the beginning.